I am overwhelmed, to say the least, which is why you find me on my library floor beside what could only be described as several mountains worth of shame. I thought it would be appropriate to share a discussion on the idea of overwhelm, particularly when it comes to having an intellectual life. Very much for social media terminology. I'm not entirely thrilled to be employing that term. It's very hashtag friendly, however, it's very searchable friendly, although I would argue that whatever an intellectual life means would be dependent upon the person pursuing it. In my perspective, an intellectual life is one in which someone dedicates a lot of their spare time, as much as possible, to learning something, to engaging their brain with an intellectual concept, either to contribute to a field or to gain perspective onto something. In the same way, a creative life is someone who may be very prone to knitting or painting and crafting for gifts. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are professional crafters in any shape or form, but their life is dedicated to using their free time for creativity. Likewise, I say the same for an intellectual life. So pardon the very superficial and rather catchy phrase there that I've used in the title. However, it does come to a point for this video, I swear. As someone who's pursuing a PhD, but I'm dedicated to spending my time, my free time, pursuing things intellectually, because that's what gives me most joy, I find myself often plagued by overwhelm. This month being not exclusively dedicated to that feeling, but very much dominated by that feeling. I became very far behind on my work due to personal reasons, and then on top of that I had a big PhD deadline, I had health issues, and what usually suffers is this is my pile of where my brain has been accumulating secondary thoughts over the past few months, and I would dip in and out of ideas, and then it would lead to a new idea, and then that would lead to a new idea, and then you end up getting this rather disorganized mess. And a lot of people then become disheartened by this because they think, well, I have a load of reading that I have not either completed in full, or it's reading that just keeps duplicating because there is more to learn and it just keeps getting deeper and deeper, but then the rest of my life isn't allowing me space for this intellectual pursuit, and therefore they think two ways. They either drop it entirely, or they think the problem is productivity. So they then focus on how can I be more productive in order to fit in an intellectual life. And here is my argument, and I think it's a big mistake, because that's where we get a lot of, in our own head, self-blaming, that we're not being productive enough, and then you can go down rabbit holes of waking up 2 hours earlier to be able to do more intellectual work. But at the end of the day, whilst it's all very good, like some of these habits are incredibly beneficial to many people, it can result in burnout, or it can also result in, say, one day something happening and then the system falls apart, the structure that you built for yourself falls apart, and then the intellectual life gets completely disregarded because it can't fit anymore. You cannot keep up with the framework that you created for yourself to be quote unquote more productive. And this video is all about the idea of not actually being more productive to fit an intellectual life into your life, or rather create space for it, but rather being able to have the skill set and the idea of an intellectual life that is able to expand and contract accordingly, so you have an intellectual life that is flexible and is able to survive moments of overwhelm, because life is unpredictable and you need something that can fit in and be malleable according to the environment in which it is part of, so therefore it doesn't get completely disregarded and pushed out of your life, but it's still a concept that you can expand and contract accordingly to the degree of overwhelm which you're facing, which is where I am in my life right now, and I thought it'd be fun to talk about it. Now, obviously, overwhelm is something that is very much mental health related as well, and I have to acknowledge that at the very beginning of this video. I will talk a lot about mental health now and then, but really this is about more confronting other areas. I've gotten better at managing my overwhelm thanks to lots of different degrees of external access. I'm someone who's very neurodivergent, and over the past few years I've had more and more support. I've had therapy, I have mentors who specialise in disability services, and if you're someone who struggles with the managing of the emotional side of overwhelm, obviously please ensure that your mental health is the priority. And one of the things that's actually genuinely been helping me recently has been today's sponsor, which is Headspace, and I say this with great pride. People know that I've been a big advocate for mental health. Mental health is something that plagues me quite a lot. And I'm incredibly proud that this video is sponsored by Headspace because it means a lot to me that they wanted to reach out and collaborate because I love this app. Headspace is a wonderful app that helps keep you accountable for taking time for mindfulness and really just chilling out. I use the Headspace app pretty religiously throughout the day. I'm not going to lie, I'm not ashamed about it, because the Headspace app has so much that I can use. It forces me to utilize something like my phone, which I've now started to associate with a lot of toxicity because of feeling those dopamine hits. There's a distraction from the phone. I actually find that app is the only app I feel good after using because it gets me out of my own head, it forces me to breathe, and it really helps me zone in on one thing at a time. I'm someone who always gets easily distracted, and I utilize my phone whilst doing something else, and I have multiple things on the go, and it's really overstimulating. But when I find with the Headspace app, I can't do that. I just focus on the app. I'm doing these 2 guided programs consecutively at the same time, and each day I think up to 10 minutes with the beginning of the sessions that I'm at right now, and I just follow those at the beginning of my day before I start work and go through my stress management and also my anxiety management, because they're the 2 things that are taking up the most of my time with everything going on. And what I'm interested in is I haven't actually used the programs before. I always just used to search what I was struggling with in the search bar and then found a particular meditation that I wanted to follow accordingly. But apparently, if I use Headspace for 2 weeks consecutively, it's been proven to decrease levels of anxiety. And by following a program, I'm going to actually measure that so I can see if I'm actually decreasing my levels of anxiety.
Hi, and welcome back to session 2. In the first session, we introduced the technique of labeling or noting our thoughts, and, at first, it may seem really simple and straightforward, but over time, you'll begin to see that this easy technique can be extremely effective in managing our anxiety, or really any emotion for that matter. And the great thing is that we can use this technique here and also in our everyday life. So essentially, what we're doing is creating space between ourselves and the thoughts that we think and emotions we feel so we can shift our perspective.
There's very few apps on my phone that I can describe as wholesome. I find the Headspace app incredibly wholesome. It's just built for good things, and it always has something for me to do, so I can follow a session, and then after my session there's usually other ones that I can follow, like a journal prompt, or even another extra expanded version of what I just listened to. And it just helps feeling like I have something there whilst I'm feeling very alone and very overwhelmed with everything. And if you're also someone who struggles with overwhelm and the emotions that come with that, or anxiety or stress, cannot recommend it enough. And if you've been curious about Headspace, then if you use my QR code or the link in the description box down below, you will get 60-day free trial of Headspace, which is amazing. That's far more than the standard free trial that they offer on the website, which is only 2 weeks. But my QR code gives you 60 days. That's 2 full months. So you can see the benefit of challenging yourself to use the app every single day to see if it helps decrease your levels of anxiety too, and you feel the actual benefit of it. Thank you so much, Headspace, for sponsoring today's video. And now let's carry on talking about how to manage overwhelm and keep an intellectual life going. What I loved about more recently in one of my videos about becoming an independent scholar was how many people were enthusiastic about that, which is fantastic, but that enthusiasm tends to also lead to overwhelm because you want to do everything. Like me, you want to read all of the books, you want to write about all the subjects, you want to go to all the museums or go to all the galleries, or maybe even go to an archive or go to that conference. It just becomes a lot, and then you put way too much on your plate because you want to do it all now, and that's where the overwhelm comes in. It can result in people feeling like a failure, feeling that they're not good enough for it. But the purpose of this video, and particularly hopefully for the rest of my channel, all honestly, is the idea of prioritizing living over everything else. It's not about production, it's not about even consumption, it's about enjoying the experience of living. And one of the greatest examples I can give about this is that feeling of trying to catch up. I am someone who has been struggling for the past few years of falling behind my PhD and feel like I need to catch up, and realized only just more recently that that entire concept is an illusion. Because yes, you can feel like you are behind. You can feel like you should have read certain texts by a certain age. You could have felt like if you are a mature student that you should have learned this in your teens, but now you're in your 40s and you're learning it for the first time, and you feel like you have to catch up. And it could be for anything. It could be either formal education or yourself. You can feel like you're behind all your peers or your friends, and you just feel like you're behind on everything. And what I want to emphasize so much right now is that just the reason that thought is completely pointless is because I can guarantee you, even in your ultimate reality, even in your ultimate reality where you went to the best school and you studied at the best university and you did every single course when you could have, when you quote unquote should have, even in that alternative reality, there would not be a time in your life where you would be able to stop and relax and go, now I can reap the benefits of that. That's not a reality. That's never going to happen. And so therefore the idea of trying to catch up is a completely pointless endeavor, because there's never going to be a moment where you have consumed it all enough to be able to go, and now I can thrive. Now I can be the person or the scholar that I want to be. Never going to happen. Never going to happen, because more books come out, more scholarship comes out, more museum exhibitions happen. The world is too big. There are too many museums around the world. There are too many art galleries around the world. There are too many discoveries happening all of the time. More books are being published. You're never going to be in a space where you are like, I'm on top of it all. And now, therefore, I can become the great, relaxed, thinker that I want to be. It's not going to happen. And so therefore we need to pull you out of this drive to catch up, whatever that may mean for you, and realize that the experience is actually living and experiencing it as it is. Doesn't matter what didn't happen in the past, what didn't happen when it should have happened. The idea of living an intellectual life is enjoying the consumption of something as you're experiencing it, because that's the time you get to experience it. Not with a higher IQ or a degree that you should have had 10 years ago behind you. Doesn't matter. You get to experience it now, and that's the enjoyment, that's the pleasure. So don't try and rush through things, try and catch up on whatever it is, that kind of, this anxious energy that haunts a lot of us, including myself, particularly in this workplace zone. And I'm taking a tiny tangent here to acknowledge it. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with the drama that happened, but I heard that Hank Green was currently in a discussion about using AI. And he was using AI not only potentially for a script that is contested for one of his video scripts, but he used it in a podcast where he discussed how, with his wife, Catherine, that he loves, I think it was Claude that he used, and he could put 2 chapters of his book together in Claude and ask Claude to combine these 2 chapters to make it more succinct. And people felt a betrayal by Hank, not only employing AI, but then also from a creative standpoint. And then Hank sort of had a moment of real emotional overwhelm where he was really pulled in lots of directions about if he should be using AI, if he shouldn't be using AI, and then feeling himself lost to AI, feeling a bit addicted to it, and this whole dependency on it. And the reason I bring that up is not to criticize his employment of AI in that way, purely because I think it's a great example of how creative people with brilliant minds are feeling the pressure. There is something in Hank's brain that made him feel like he doesn't have enough time in this world around him to do the things himself. He doesn't have time to combine those 2 chapters together. He just needs to get on with it, this rush. And that's the same drive that's happening with this idea of needing to catch up. And we're losing our ability to just live in the present at all. And that includes in intellectual spaces, with intellectual content, with consuming, with thinking, with writing. And that's what's causing a lot of people to feel overwhelmed and crash out. So if you pull out away from that moment of idea of catching up with yourself, the moment you can just go, okay, this is here. We get to it when we get to it, when we start building ourselves a minimum viable daily endeavour with the intellectual life. So when there are moments of overwhelm, sometimes you could just toss it to the side and just go, no, we're not doing that at all. But if you have a minimum viable way of engaging with that intellectual life every single day, then at least you're not disconnecting from it. Granted, it's not the deep academic work that you may want to do, but that is better touching base with it ever so slightly every single day than disregarding it for months at a time. My poor PhD. So it could be as simple as saying I get to read this chapter of this text, which is related to my subject, for 5 minutes a day, and that's it. When I have my breakfast, I read with my breakfast. Not even time limit on it. After work, and you get home from work, you may even say I get to have a 25-minute break after work where I just read my subject. Or if you have children or caring responsibilities that you need to do after work, there will be a moment when you go, actually, for these 10 minutes every day, whatever that may be, I will read this thing for 10 minutes. It's related to my subject. It may be archaeology, it could be ancient weaving. Hi, me, projecting myself into that. Having that minimum viable is really important, because we also have to understand that there are tiers to our brain. When we are in moments of overwhelm, we have to accept that our brain functions at different tiers during different circumstances. And I've identified like 3 tiers to my brain. You may think there are 4 to yours or 2 to yours, but mine's 3. So I tend to have very low. We have low tier brain, where it's just I can't concentrate on anything, I'm not capable of anything, what do I do? Then I have a middle tier brain, which is like I could concentrate. Am I in my best state? Probably not. I can concentrate a little bit though. And then we have my full force brain. And full force brain can do everything. Full force brain can annotate, work for many hours at a time, write intellectual content, write my dissertation, what it may be. No, the only reason I can get to the third full force brain is if I have to accept some days it's either tier 1 or tier 2, more days than not. But unfortunately, when people, again, going back to ourselves, we get overwhelmed, we don't have a minimum viable daily contact with our whatever intellectual life. Therefore, we quote unquote fall behind. And then you think to catch up then, and you're forced into it. You're forcing yourself into what I call tier 3 brain, which is full force brain. And then everything goes wrong. You can't do it. You get stressed. You're asking yourself, why can't I do this? I've become dumber. I'm not clever enough to do this. My brain is rotting. You have all these horrible thoughts because you're trying to force yourself into tier 3 brain when your brain's not there. So if you find yourself in a position where you feel really disconnected from your work, really disconnected from an intellectual life of any kind, work on building your little tiers beforehand. I have tier 1, tier 2. So tier 1 brain, brain that cannot concentrate on anything, feels really disconnected from the world. Tier 1 brain only focuses on really easy consumable content. That would be audiobooks for me. I get an audiobook of something related to my subject, or even an audiobook of a book that I already own that I need to reread for the purposes of my intellectual content. But at the moment, I can't focus on anything. So I force myself to consume the book via audiobook, again, to refresh my brain. Another fantastic low tier brain that we all have access to for free, if you're watching this video, you have it too, is watching a lecture online. You can watch so many lectures on YouTube of lecturers in your subject. You're not really having to do much work other than listen, but make sure you're doing it without distractions. Make sure that you've turned off everything else, that you're not browsing Google whilst you're doing it or looking at your phone. Focus on the lecture at hand. And other low tier brain things for me include like looking at the contents page of a book. So grabbing a non-fiction book that I look at and just looking at the contents page, reminding myself what's there, what I'm actually interested in, and just tabbing them but not reading them. Or looking at pictures, like looking at art, looking at archaeology photographs for me a lot of the time. Then we have second tier brain. Second tier brain can concentrate on certain things, but you're not ready for big brain stuff yet. But second tier brain is building you up to big brain tier. So that would be reading 10 pages of a book that you need to read soon, but only 10 pages and then leaving it. Second tier brain also includes like annotating, not taking lots of notes, just annotating in the margins or with a sticky note and just annotating it. Reading a single essay on a subject that you're interested in, just a single one, nothing else more than that. But these are all important steps to then get into big brain mode. And it's really important to not look at things in terms of productivity, but rather evaluate what is my brain capable of today that will serve my intellectual life, and then just go from there. This has really been a lifesaver for me this month, is to stop consuming and just pump things out of your brain. The amount of I call it mental clutter, and we're not talking about like thoughts that you have, although this is the same technique. When it comes to intellectual stuff, you do accumulate a lot of things naturally when you're reading about your subject, and you don't think you're ready for putting it down on paper yet. So you let them sit in your brain, and then you become really overwhelmed because there's more to read, there's more to write, there's more to research, and then it just becomes a big bubble in your head. It just becomes buzzing. And then sometimes it's just really important to just sit there and word vomit it all out into some kind of format without consuming anything whilst you're doing it. Just push it all out onto a page, whether that's a notebook, a Word document, get it all out. And then you look at it and you go, okay, now I can see the areas where I need to fill in the gaps. And then you can go and consume and fill in the gaps accordingly. But you needed to get all that stuff out of your brain until you could actually see the direction of where you were going. You know more than you think you do. So if you're overwhelmed, get out what you can, and then you can go in and add to it and fill in the gaps and start consuming again. But start putting the things that you've already consumed somewhere, because it can't just keep sitting in your head. Another really great thing to do when you're feeling overwhelmed and you just is too much is to pick what I call shallow adjacent subjects. So this is, and what I mean by this is, say you're interested or you're really big into researching, I'm going to use this example, Jane Austen, but right now you can't handle it. You can't handle reading theory about sensibility. So pick an adjacent shallow subject. And when I say shallow, it's not shallow in a general sense. It's shallow to you because it's not a specialist interest of yours, but it is interesting. So for you, if you're a Jane Austen person, that could be looking at the costumes that they use in the BBC production of Pride and Prejudice and just looking at them, researching about them, reading blogs. Obviously that subject is not shallow if you are a historian of clothing or if you are someone who specialises in design of clothing. Obviously not, it's not shallow to those people. But if you are not that person, it's a shallow subject to you. Doesn't mean anything, it's not deep, but it's related to what you're interested in. And it's interesting to you because you do love the BBC production of Pride and Prejudice. It's something that you don't have to specialise in, but you're really interested in it anyway, and it's fun. You have to engage with these fun things. And I want to end this by saying, really, that again, whilst I'm someone who hasn't been able to engage in what I call my public casual intellectual discussions, because I've been really head in on my PhD topic this month and I had a lot to get done, and it sort of I enjoyed everything about it, but it felt like I wasn't being quote unquote productive to YouTube, to my Patreons, to anything, and it felt really sad and I felt really guilty about it, particularly when I have all these things that I'm interested in. It can become really upsetting to feel like you're losing your intellectual life in some way, because there are avenues that you want to study. Again, you want to read everything, you want to look at everything, but you don't want to lose your passion to a feeling of failure. And I think one of the best ways to ensure that you don't do that is to measure your intellectual life, whatever that may be for you, in terms of magnetic, exciting, and life-fulfilling thoughts and ideas rather than productivity. So rather than looking at how many words did I write this week, how many books have I read this year, how many pages have I read this week, how many essays have I read this week, all these metrics, which are really important to keep track of, particularly if you are someone who has a timeline. Hi me. At the same time, there are moments in your life where you just need to live it and not get caught up on the pedantics of measuring productivity, and measure your intellectual life by feeling. Do I feel like I've learned something interesting? Do I feel like my life has been freshened in some way? Do I feel like actually, yeah, I had a moment where I really connected with a theory and it made me think about my life in a different way? And those moments are really important to capture and to secure somewhere, to memorialize somewhere, so when you feel overwhelmed, remind yourself what you're doing it for. So for me, I have what I call like my PhD diary, and they're just moments where it's nothing to do with my research, but when I'm researching and something hits me and has an emotional connection with me, I write it down and I go, actually, I just learned about this and this has really affected me because of this. And you can have whatever sort of like intellectual life diary you may want to call it. And when you're reading something, whatever you care about, and you have a moment where you feel seen when you're reading, you feel like something has hit you and affected you in a way, and that's important to document. And that's your measurement of an intellectual life. Because I feel like that's a healthier way to not feel so overwhelmed. Because there's always going to be more we can read. There's going to be so much more that we can write. There's going to be so many newsletters we could do and podcasts we can do. And I'm talking to myself here because I can feel it all slipping away from me. But I have to remember that I am human and I actually have to do things at my pace. And sadly, it's not the most productive pace. It's not the best pace for a PhD student running your own business, but it's important for me to take care of my well-being and remember why I'm doing it. So I hope you found this discussion fun. If you did, please consider giving it a like and a thumbs up. I have a Google form list down below so you can send in your requests for me to cover things. I know someone recently gave me a request about how do you deal with the FOMO of having so much to read and not reading it fast enough. I'm actually going to do a whole video on that, so stay tuned for that. And thank you as always to my Patreons for making this possible, and including my top tier patrons who are Eric Taylor, Lady of the Labyrinth, Jenny Edovane, Yvonne and Yvonne, Joshua Heredia, Holly is Autistic, Gil the Gilded Dragon, That Darn Cat, Nicholas Reed, Andy Bazil, and wee Lauren, thank you as always, and I hope you are happy and healthy, and remember, books save lives. So keep reading.